No one country or no one entity can survive alone. We should talk to each other. Understanding is the basis.
We will welcome 3,200 participants, and we have the representation of 333 cabinet-level government members.
It's February 1st. You're just back from the World Economic Forum. You're reading a newspaper. Now it's the front page, below the fold. And it turns out that there are 300 deaths there from this mysterious illness, still yet to be identified, called disease X. One of the people who was sick but not yet died had been there from an NGO who had gone to see to figure out what was happening, had seen and examined some of the patients and tissues, had attended the World Economic Forum, where you had been. And it had been pretty clear that there was a 2-week period during which you were asymptomatic but could communicate the disease. That person was at the World Economic Forum when you were there at a time when the disease could have been communicated. Are you panicked yet? You should be. That disease is disease X. Their World Health Organization, it's time to, you can have disbelief back now. The World Health Organization has a list of diseases about which we need to do more research to understand their biology and how to mitigate them. But they added to the list disease X. Now, disease X can be a biological disease that came from natural selection, as it were, jumped to humans, and we haven't yet identified it. In that case, it's usually part of a known family, and you could begin to understand its behavior by knowing how the family members behave. But it's also possible that somebody engineered disease X, made it in their basement laboratory. Fairly sophisticated laboratory, but we'll talk about that in the panel. And they were trying to get rid of some of the people they didn't like in this Central African country with this disease. They thought it would die out. They didn't realize that it would have this kind of potential. So as we think about biological threats, it's important to understand that this is actually a scenario that could be true. To do this could happen.
Well, that's sort of like what we call kind of the silver lining scenario, right? Where the world actually comes out in a better place at the end of the day, right? That we've learned a lot, we've built up systems, there's a lot of collaboration, etc. You know, this can happen coming out of a war. You know, you think about what happened after World War II in the US and Europe and so on. Lots of collaboration, we built a whole new world order coming out of that. That's the best case.
But there was a return to the status quo. I mean,
that ain't going to happen. We're past that point.
Oh, really? Okay, so
Yeah,
see more about that, because I did see one of the 4 was, hey, we could actually go back and, you know, we're back doing what we were doing, kind of thing.
No, I think we've passed that point. It's one of the scenarios that will disappear. There's no return to where we were. That scenario is gone. And the adaptation is also greater.
In a positive way, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
So there is no going back to the old days thing.
Yeah,
okay.
We're not going to go back to the way we worked, learned, shopped before.
Well,
or
okay,
governed.
so excuse me, what was that last
Or
part you
governed.
said? Or governed. Okay. Excuse me, what was that last
Or
part
governed.
you said? Or governed. Okay. Well, let's see. Excuse me, what was that last
Or
part
governed.
you said? Or governed. Okay. Excuse me, what was that last
Or
part you
governed.
said? Or governed. Okay. Well, let's say more about. It's no turning back on a few of these things.
Well, I mean, just think about the election. I mean, are we going to have paper ballots, people going to the polls and voting on November, whatever the date of the election is this year? I think it's unlikely. Question: how will we conduct a national election in November? Look, if we go paper, we're not going to have enough people vote. If we go electronic, the Russians are going to disrupt it. So there's no good scenario for the election. At Davos last year, not this current year, last year, we had a serious conversation of what it would take to kind of get the world going again. And there was universal agreement that, because we were already drifting into fragmentation and conflict, as a result, we came to the conclusion that it was going to take real major new leadership. And the only way you got that was a massive crisis, World War II being the perfect example, right? So out of World War II, you get Churchill, Truman, Roosevelt, Eisenhower, de Gaulle, people like that, leading the world coming out of the war. So a question, do we get those kinds of people rising? Do we get somebody who rises as a result of the crisis? Andrew, I think that's the really big question. Does the crisis induce an adequate response of great new leadership to lead us coming out of this into rebuilding a better world faster? I'm leading a project for Salesforce to deploy rapidly case tracking software, right? That enables you, if you find somebody who's sick, who did they have contact with? And using cell phones to either track locations or people. Well, there are important privacy implications of that. And immediately, as soon as we said, all right, here's a solution to finding the disease, the privacy activists said, wait a minute. No. You might reveal somebody. Now, as it happens, the applications have been, the two that are kind of competitive, one from Singapore and one from MIT, different approaches. One uses Bluetooth, one uses GPS, doesn't matter. Each are built around the idea of protecting privacy. Are they perfect? Not at all. Are they essential? Absolutely. Are they being deployed in Singapore? Yes. In the United States? No. Because the privacy folks have immediately put up their hands and said, wait a minute, not so sure. We have to do a full assessment of how this be. And they're going to do that, and eventually we'll get around to deploying it long after many people have died. And so I'm wrestling with my own privacy people at Salesforce, meeting tonight, to look at, can we deploy this, or are the damage to our reputation so huge that we can't afford to deploy the technology?
And just for those that are watching this, just because I know a little something what you're saying there, what you're talking about there is the ability through cell phones to understand someone who does get this virus, who they have been in contact with, and be able to trace that back quickly, right?
Well, there are two different approaches. One is with Bluetooth. If you and I both have the software on our phone and we go near it within 6 feet, it will send me a signal. Hey, you're next to somebody who's got a disease, or you were worse. If I get it, I can then, the authorities can then send back to everybody who was near me, hey, you were near Schwartz and he has the disease. The alternate approach is using GPS. They'll track your movements, and when people determine, hey, that supermarket, there were people who were affected and you went through that supermarket, they'll let you know. So they're different in their approach. They're both aiming to protect the privacy of the individual. In both cases, no data ever leaves the phone unless the person is infected and needs to share that information. So there's hard work to protect the privacy, but neither of them is perfect. And as a result, what we're seeing is a lot of opposition, despite the fact that people are going to die.
I can imagine another scenario here is that people are going to get more open to less privacy to be more safe in the future.
Which I think is the likely outcome over the long run. I think when people start dying because the privacy act said you can't share information, you can't share data on disease results, you can't share early results of drug trials, we're going to get a lot of willingness to share information.
How are we striking this balance between the need to keep the American people safe and our concerns about privacy? Because there are some trade-offs involved.
Using what we're doing here, Zoom, better tools for collaboration, better tools for remote engagement, all of those kinds of things that were moving already. Most of my calls in recent years have been video calls. Well, now they're all video calls.
And the thing that'll get us back to the world that we had before coronavirus is the vaccine and getting that out to all 7 billion people. And so the efforts to test those, to build the factories, to understand, is it safe and ready to go? That's a global problem. And, so I'm glad, that people are coming together to find where is the best work and combine that. The factory will be in a different country than the science is in. This is the whole world working on probably the most urgent tool that's ever been needed.
Your team used models of what we now know about COVID-19, along with other viruses, to create possible scenarios of the pandemic, one which concluded a potential need for social distancing until 2022. Can you explain how you found that?
Absolutely. So there are two ways in which the pandemic ends. One, we eliminate the virus. I think with global spread of the virus, that one is quite unlikely. In the second, pandemic ends because there's sufficient immunity in the population. So with that as a backdrop, we were interested in asking about the impact of social distancing and what happens when we stop a one-time effort. So we are doing social distancing with the idea of flattening the curve and trying to prevent overwhelming our healthcare infrastructure. So if we're successful in doing that, we also keep a lot of people susceptible to the infection, so that if we stop social distancing after 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, or what have you, there will still be a pool of people who are susceptible, and we might see, again, a rise in infection, which might prompt us to reinitiate social distancing. Mm-hmm. So keeping in mind that our goal is getting up to population-level immunity in the absence of a vaccine or potentially other types of interventions, what we might see is this kind of on-off intermittent distancing. And to get up to population immunity, again, that endpoint would take until 2022.
But we need to start getting things back to normal. They won't be back to normal until we either have that phenomenal vaccine or a therapeutic that's like over 95% effective. And so we have to assume that's going to be almost 18 months from now. People act like you have a choice. People don't feel like going to the stadium when they might get infected. It's not the government who's saying, okay, just ignore this disease. And, people are deeply affected by seeing these deaths, by knowing they could be part of the transmission chain. And, old people, their parents, their grandparents could be affected by this. And so you don't get to say, ignore what's going on here. There will be the ability, particularly in rich countries, to open up if things are done well over the next few months. But for the world at large, normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population.
Can you repeat what you just said, please?
Well, last Friday, I received a 7-page document that sort of told me that if I had an 86-year-old patient that had pneumonia but was never tested for COVID-19, but sometime after she came down with pneumonia, we learned that she had been exposed to her son who had no symptoms, but later on was identified with COVID-19, that it would be appropriate to diagnose on the death certificate COVID-19. Now, we've not done that. If someone has the pneumonia after and it's in the middle of a flu epidemic, and I don't have a test on influenza, I don't diagnose influenza on the death certificate. I will say this elderly patient died of pneumonia.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but my heart is sinking right now as you're telling me this. You're a doctor. Why in the world would they be sending you out information to fill out death certificates, whether the person's been diagnosed with COVID-19 or not, but then to say in the death certificate this person's death was caused by COVID-19? That does not sound right to me.
So ask people to follow my Instagram, and if they want to be part of the resistance, to join Children's Health Defense, because we're suing these guys, and we're going to sue Gates, and we're going to sue all of them, and Fauci. So come on board and help us.
I'll promote all that stuff, Bobby, and we'll have it all lined up when we do the podcast. But hey, thanks for sharing time with us.
Yeah, man, thank you.
Yeah.
So ask people to follow my Instagram, and if they want to be part of the resistance, to join Children's Health Defense, because we're suing these guys, and we're going to sue Gates, and we're going to sue all of them, and Fauci. So come on board and help us.
I'll promote all that stuff, Bobby, and we'll have it all lined up when we do the podcast. But hey, thanks for sharing time with us.
Yeah, man, thank you.
Feeling my way through the darkness, guided by a beating heart. I can't tell where the journey will end, but I know where it starts. They tell me I'm too young to understand. They say I'm caught up in a dream. Well, life will pass me by if I don't open up my eyes, and that's fine by me. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. I tried carrying the weight of the world, but I only have two hands. I hope I get the chance to travel the world, but I don't have any plans. I wish that I could stay forever this young, and not afraid to close my eyes. Oh, life's a game made for everyone, and love is a prize. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. So wake me up when